Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lawrence, and I'm here to present the basics of EDIs, um, what EDI is, and how to read documents or specifications from several quote-unquote manufacturers that make use, or consumers that make use of EDIs. And for this particular session, we're going to be talking about EDIs that are mainly used for states, for reporting state taxes. Okay, so first, what is EDI? EDI is acronym for Electronic Data Interchange. And basically, this is a way of standardizing documents, electronic documents, and having a specific format for different applications or softwares or quote-unquote consumers to make use of, so that there will be a standard issue format, so that there will be no so they can be easily be read or generated by any consuming application, given the standard or the version of the EDI that will be specified. Okay, so that's basically it. EDIs, there are certain types of EDIs used within any industry. I believe this is mainly used within the US, although I'm not sure if it's being used by other countries as well. But for the US at least, it's being used by the automotive industry, financial services, tech industry, and retail industry. In the retail industry, one part of that is the reporting of taxes of companies trying to report their taxes to certain states. Most of the US states, at least, are already using EDIs, but of different versions. Just to give you an overview, several, or the most commonly used EDI version is X12 4030. As you can see, there are several states making use of that as their standard for tax reporting. There is, however, a lot of other versions that is out there. We have here X12 3050, a much newer one, a much older one, and we have relatively older 4010 version. As you can see, the most commonly used, for at least for tax reporting, is X12 4030. I believe on other this X12 4030 is the most commonly used within other industries as well. The tax reporting or the retail industry is mostly the most updated industries making use of EDI. Financial services, I believe, is using a much older one, maybe even the X12 4030, or even a 3010, or even older, 3050, or even older. For I-21, we only have X12 4030 as of the moment. We're still trying to figure out how to implement many versions within a single application, but I believe we can do that because we basically took a code set that was out there on the market, and that is EDI Fabric. So basically they sell their codes, and we have those codes, and we can implement, well, theoretically, we can implement any EDI version within a single application. So what I'm trying to say is, I think we're pretty much geared towards having multiple versions, having be able to handle multiple versions. So there are other, I'm trying to show you other wait. I think it's in the forum, but there are. There. X12 is the most commonly used major version of EDI, and then we have the 2040 to 4010, which is like a minor revision of EDI. These are mostly format tweaks that are implemented into the EDI for I don't know, because there's not much speed or performance boost to any of these versions, or difference to any of these versions. It's just a matter of one application trying to implement a specific version and being able to and the generated EDIs be able to be read by other versions. HIPP PAA templates are also available, which I believe is a more secured version of EDIs. We haven't digged into detail about this types of EDI, but these are the main EDI formats used or version used by financial industries. Okay, so that's what an EDI is. For our specific session, we will only be discussing in detail the specs used widely on states, on U.S. federal states, U.S. federal and U.S. states for tax reporting. And there are other EDIs. I believe I've read some that are EDI standards for other hardwares trying to interface into other softwares. So they are making use of EDI formats to have a standard, at least, to be able to seamlessly synchronize to any application that at least reads certain versions of EDIs. So I've seen some from Store for handheld scanners. I've seen, I think on our inventory module, there is one vendor EDIs. So that's basically a vendor trying to give out EDI files to us as I-21, and us trying to read those seamlessly through specific formats that are governed by EDI standards. So in this specific session, I'll be showing you EDI guides of a state and their tax reporting EDI. And for this one, we have North Carolina, which is a much more basic EDI, and South Carolina as well, but just to give differences. So each, like for this example, for this session, North Carolina and South Carolina both makes use of X12 version 4030. So later on, I'll be showing you the differences. Even though they are using the same EDI format or EDI version, they can still have differences on the implementation of the EDI. So let's start by going through the introduction. Usually on the introduction part of the documents, they are mentioning which reports will be included for EDI reporting, because basically there will be like for North Carolina, there are only 3 reports that are required by the North Carolina state to be included in the EDI. Other reports that may have data doesn't need, or they may not have an electronic filing program yet for those other reports. So basically, mostly states require electronic filing on the most active reports that they have for their state. These are the most commonly used or the most data-heavy reports that may be too much to be reported manually. So they require electronic filing programs for those. So for the introduction, it is most common to state which reports are to be included in an EDI report or an EDI file. Okay, so you'll see that here. Both returns and payments will be accepted in the department's electronic filing program, and etc. etc. Okay, contact information of the EDI coordinator per state. Usually, like for example, for our motor fuel taxes for the tax reports, there are always certain companies or application developers that apply their applications into the EDI filing process, and they have these contacts to actually test or to give them. They send out test files to these coordinators when trying to apply for not really a license, but more of like a go signal, or because it's not a formal license. You don't need a formal license to be able to create or generate EDI files within your software. But you at least need to have assurance from a coordinator that it works fine, or at least in their standards or by their standards. Okay, understanding EDI, that's, yeah, understanding EDI. And naming convention. Their naming convention of an EDI is subject to initial validation of first state. So example, a state gets an EDI file from someone, if it's not on the right file naming convention, they wouldn't even load it. They wouldn't even open it. So it has to be in this certain format for them to even take a look at it. Okay. Even test files, like I've said earlier, should be in such file naming convention. So this is like a summary of what's concatenated within the file name. So for this specific one, North Carolina, there are multiple files that are being submitted. EDI 813 and EDI 820. From here, from the, where is that? Yeah, here. Department prefers to receive all returns in a single file using separate 813 transaction sets. Later, I will discuss the transaction set that they're talking about. However, the filer can choose to send each supply return, terminal operator return, and transporter return in a separate file. So it's really up to the application or the software generating the EDI file for it to send multiple sets or multiple files. Normally, this happens when a specific transaction or a specific type of report does not get is not run or not generated within real time. I mean, there are reports that are generated real time whenever the user wants or the application needs to. There are also reports that are subjected monthly or quarterly or even weekly or daily. Although there are not much that are daily. I mean, most of the time it's monthly and quarterly for state taxes. So you can opt to maybe file just motor fuel supply return or transporter return, or either, or it could be in such a case where your company or the company trying to file an EDI doesn't make use of that report. That's very common for smaller companies. Okay, and here are the specifics for when or the time or the deadlines of filing certain reports. As you can see from here, for North Carolina, they are all the same. That's why they recommend filing all transactions within a single file, because it's also within the single the same deadline, so might as well have them as one. Okay, payments, yeah. Okay, certification procedures. So I guess there's a certificate, but you're really not required to have certifications. These are for customers and for applications, for softwares. Okay. So production filing procedures. Excuse me. This is what I was talking about when when generated EDIs could be a test or production file. So when it's a test production, the EDI coordinator, when it's a test file, the EDI coordinator simply verifies the data and sets if they are valid. And if it's a production file, they are being counter-checked on other reports. Usually, even if a state has EDI filing, they also have manual filings, and they try to counter-check your values, the data on your EDI against manual reports, manual transactions, and that's they only do that on production EDIs. They don't do that on test EDIs. Usually, test EDIs are done by beginning or newly minted companies or software companies trying to create their EDI generation tools. Okay, that's also that. And that's basically it. The data model here is not really, doesn't have any bearing at all. I mean, this is what they this is what they imagine. This is what the North Carolina state imagine how their their data structure, or anyone who makes use of their EDI format, that they're thinking this will be the structure, but this is an older approach on developing softwares for EDIs. Okay. So we have here the attributes and separator conventions. So basically an EDI, just to give you a quick look at how it looks. I think I have a sample here. We can, so basically it's a text file, but on a different format. As you can see, an EDI may look like this. It usually looks like this. What's this? I believe it's a squiggly character. It's usually delimited by a squiggly character, but it's much more complex because this can be readable on XML format as well. So basically, they have separators, they have paddings or anything like that, or they have lengths that distinguish a certain field from the next field. So these are the types, and we won't go into detail with that. But basically, these are what will, this will be used within the guide further. So let's go into the guide. So here is an EDI envelope. An EDI envelope is basically like, it's the term they coined on an EDI file, because basically if it was a manual filing, you had an envelope and you had all the forms in there and then pass it on. So they called it EDI envelope as well, even for the digital copy. So an envelope, like for this one, this is an 813 envelope, and I'm not sure why this is a 997 envelope, but I think they have another, what is that? 820 filing. So I'm not sure why this is 997, but basically like this one, an 813 envelope has an ISA, a GES, and GE and IEA. Basically, that's interchange control header, functional group header, and this is trailer and trailer. And then the transaction sets. which are basically the actual records. So basically, we're looking at like groupings. So the main file will always have a single ISA, and the counterpart trailer is an IEA. And the groups, we can, later on, there will be instructions on how to group, quote unquote, group transactions. So that's like an overview of what an EDI file should have. Okay, the interchange control header. So there are for an EDI there will always be so let's call interchange control header as ISA. Okay, so that's the standard acronym of that. I'm not sure what S is for, but that's it. So an ISA will always have up to 16 properties or parameters or variables, as we may call it. These variables will always be present on an EDI, but may not be used within the EDI. Within this guide, it will tell you if a certain variable or a certain property is used, how it is used, or yeah, the specifications basically. So ISA 01, which is from here, from the field description, no authorization information present. And basically that's 00 always. So that's how it's being described in here. The length, minimum, maximum, is has a huge bearing because that's how the padding is done automatically by the EDI, if I may say. And as you can see from here, the instructions are very specific. The field type is what what was mentioned from this part: ID, AN, date, time, numeric. That's basically the field types in here. Okay, and yeah, and you can see the field description is very specific. Like I've said, it will for this example, North Carolina makes use of all 16 variables. And later on, I will show you this is more of the developer end, but the element reference number is used within the development, within the codes. Okay. And then the next part of the envelope is the functional group header, which is the GS. Basically, that's the same. Field descriptions are also very helpful, very specific on this one. And for here, I think, so like this one, it has 8 variables, although, yeah, all of which are also being used. Also, look, you may also need to look at syntax notes and FTA notes. They are very specific as well. And like this one, I say 09 does not include the century based on the ANSI X12 standard. So 09 is date. And as you can see, there are only 6 characters. So centuries are omitted. If it's 2010, it's only 10, something like that. Okay. Do you have any questions so far on those? Okay, so I think that means no. Okay, for the trailer description, very specific as well. Count of transactions within the GSG. Um, okay. And the interchange control trailer, which is IEA, and that's it for the headers, So I think the next part will be, okay, EDI Combined Reporting. This basically is the part where all transaction types are combined. I'm talking about this ones. What I mentioned earlier, where certain reports are reported within a single EDI. Several reports are reported within a single EDI. So this is the structure that will be used within that. So basically, this is starting, the transaction sets are starting to unfold on this part of the guide. Okay. Okay. So these are basically codes that are used on the development end. These are references to the codes as well. Basically, if they are used or not. Within TOR is transaction operation report, I think. SDR supplier, and CCR is, yeah, this one, common carrier report. Okay. And the trailer. So map flow is like the envelope flow. So these are the specifics now. So it's a transaction set header, then taxpayer name. This is basically the more detailed version of this table. Okay. So it's like, yeah, it's showing you the structure. That's basically it. And so the transaction set header, as you can see from the structure, it's going to be the first one on the transaction sets. And moving forward, we'll see the rest as well. So for the transaction set header, it's basically like what was used on the ISA. I mean, the format of the guide is very specific. It will tell you if there is a default data that needs to be in there, or like a required data that needs to be in there. Okay, like for this specific one, North Carolina requires use of STO3. This means that, like I've said earlier, certain variables or parameters within the structure may not be used by a specific EDI. Let's quickly look at SCEDI and see the transaction set, which is ST. ST. Like for this one, it is recommended that STO3 be used to help identify which implementation guide the trading partner is using. This element will help the receiver of the data determine if the sender is using an old guide or the most current guide. However, it is not required. Okay. For ease of use, for the one over at the EDI coordinator over at the State Department, it is much better for us to make use of what's being instructed here. However, it is not required by the state. So if we give out a certain, at least for South Carolina, but for North Carolina, it is being required. So that's where the differences between certain implementing institutions differ. So if we were if we were to create our own, I mean, if we, as in I-21, would create our own EDI standards, we can make use of the same X12, 40, 30 version. However, implement a more it's really up to us if we implement a more rigid, a more lenient format for other applications to make use of, or to easily, seamlessly synchronize with our formats. So let's go back to North Carolina and transaction set header. So it's still the same. The field descriptions are very helpful. Yeah, there. Okay. So for the BTI, which is the Begin Tax Information segment, this is another header, but yeah, as you can see, there are more specific instructions now with regards to these ones, because these ones are now the ones that are holding more sensitive or more crucial information. So for this one is, okay, let's look at the index syntax codes. If either BTI 07 or 08 is present, then the other is required. This would mean that if there are values within 07, then 08 will be required as well. Later on, I will show you how that will look like on an EDI EDI notepad, which is like a verifier. It is also provided by EDI Fabric. I mean, EDI notepad is provided by EDI Fabric, where we got our code set for the EDIs. Okay, and other requirements as well. And in here, BTI 107 must be the FEIN if the taxpayer has one. Only for sole proprietorship that have not been issued an FEIN. So these ones are being used. So in here, it is being required that an FEIN, if there is one for the taxpayer. This is usually a variable on an application wherein maybe have this information available on the company setup, or a specific vendor setup, or something like that, whichever is being required by the state or by the implementing agency. Okay, and I'm not sure if I should. Okay, I'll show the code parts later as well. Okay, these ones are old. These what do you call this? Dashed out instructions are old instructions that are no longer used by the state. So from here, that's BTI 12 will be assigned by the state. So that means this one. There are some instructions where you are being instructed to not make use of the. Okay, I think that's not here. There. So the next one in line for the structure is daytime reference segment, and as you can see, this is what I was talking about. DTM 03 and 04 are not used, so it's not required by the state. I mean, it's even required to not use it. It should be null or blank. Okay. So basically, that's the format, or that's the flow of the guide. Everything else is very specific for each of for any guide that makes use of this any EDI format, because as I've said, the implementing agency for this specific session is the NC state, is the one who pretty much controls, or yeah, pretty much controls what they want to receive. So that's it. It is being said here that reference number segments are not required, at least for this specific part. And that's basically the same thing on the rest of the guide. Okay, so but to cut it short, all of this are the details of this map flow. This map flow we should always be used. As you can see here, it will also mention if there needs to be a loop. As you can see here, it is also mentioning that the maximum number of loops is 100,000. So this is because certain readers or EDI readers have limits on reading EDI files. So this would mean that the reader used by North Carolina has a maximum of 100,000. So if that's the case, and where you had more than 100,000 transactions that needed to be reported, you would have to have the next transaction flow, a next EDI envelope. That, I think, is this one. Count. I believe it's just a minute. There usually is a counter to distinguish what part of the, I mean, like a page. What page is this? Something like that. So I guess North Carolina has no such thing. But usually, if it had a maximum, there would have been like a counter of the next EDI file that you are going to submit. I think it's in the transaction flow though. Yeah, I think this is the supplemental. So it will be a supplemental for North Carolina in particular. These are the instructions when they have supplemental EDIs that are like in continuation of a previous EDI. Okay, so that's basically it for understanding the document. On this is very helpful for QAs trying to test validities of the EDI generated, for example, MFT QAs that are testing tax form reports or tax form EDIs generated by I-21. Okay, let's now turn into the code part. Don't mind the errors for now. Let's go into. So this is for MFT, for motor fuel taxes. We've implemented the code set into tax form project. So this is the actual code of EDI Fabric. So that's it. It's mostly parameters and other properties which are being parsed dynamically according to versions. So this will change if we were using a different EDI version. So the framework as well. The framework is the more basic, basic framework of EDI. And let's look at the implementation of an EDI. So let's go to North Carolina. As you can see, I did not, for this specific session, I used the North Carolina state, and I did not make use of the suggested data model of an EDI, because they're basically saying that it should be on entities, and we no longer need that because we can have them on basic structures, which are more efficient than actual entities. Let's go back to the code. So for motor fuel taxes, we are requiring the user to specify their configurations. As you can see, there are ISA configurations, which are basically taking from our configuration table. Let me show that quickly. This. So okay, that is not working properly, but just to give you an overview. This is, oh no, this is not it. There. So basically, we have all the configuration stuff on the database, and we allow the user to modify that. We have defaults, however, Like for this one, we have the state account number, which is oh no, not that one. We have ISA01, which is defaulted to 0, like what was instructed in here. So we have those by default on the database, and we basically use them within the application. So almost all configurations are available, and then we just add defaults according to the instructions of the EDI guide. So motor fuels, NC motor fuels for ISA 08, and we have ISA 08 NC motor fuels. And then here is what I was wanting to show you. Like, for example, a control number. So this is IEA control number. And from IEA part of the configuration, no, not this one. Let's go to ISAs. Okay. So the reference number let's just use the group headers, like this one. Sender group. So group here is a defined variable, but is within the EDI framework. Group.gs. As you can see, the framework is not very helpful on the parameters they have. But basically, the element reference number from the EDI helps with this. So this is saying that I'm not sure why GS01, the 1 is 479. D479 is D4791. So it's saying that 479 is GS01. That's how it is being read. Some, like the ISA, may not make use of that, but it will always be in such a way that the last numbers is the parameter number. The middle number, the middle part, is usually the reference element number, element reference number. I have not seen, aside from Indiana State, where they are using the sub-element reference number, and that is not always the case. But basically, that's how it is being loaded. I will also show you this. I think it's per. It's not in here. It's in here. Here, the BTI begin tax information segment. it is mentioned here that there. If either BTI 07 or BTI 08 is present, then the other is required. Usually there is 7 and 8. So usually there is a Boolean parameter, Boolean property within the framework that mentions if a specific value or a specific property or configuration maybe should be specified. So it is being set to true. Certain properties from different segments of the EDI file may not be required. So let's look for a false. No, not in the EDI command. It's no longer used in there, but here. It's a TFS. So I guess for here, let's look at the transaction. Yeah, the TFS loop. TFS 03 and 04 are not used. So it's being mentioned here that TFS 03 and wait, that's wrong. 04 are not used. I think this is the wrong one. No, we're looking at what is this? TOR. Okay, I think we like this one. We saw it here that I think it should also. Oh no, TFS 05 is specified, and 04, 03 is not. As you can see, we also didn't make use of the 04, which is fine. By default, it is set to false. So because basically TFS 03 here, TFS 03 is null, and TFS 04 is also null. I guess we didn't specify 04 since it doesn't have a Boolean property that says if it's specified or not. Okay, so that's the part of the bearing of the element reference number. So yeah, I think that's basically it. The guide will be quite huge in reference to other specifications that we had, but the guide is very specific. The guide is very sequential or very step by step. So it is very easy to understand actually if you come to think of it, judging by the amount of pages this EDI guide has, because the next part of the guide will only be addendums. There. That's why it's quite intimidating at first, because it has so many pages, but basically you just need several parts of the guide to implement the EDI. Okay, so with that, do you have any questions, guys? As I've said earlier, EDIs For this specific session, we've only introduced EDI guides used by tax states. However, there will be other EDI guides used by other industries. Some other EDI guides may be specifications from project managers over at Fort Wayne, which will be very helpful. That only means that certain states, like this one, will be giving out their own guides. Some project managers would read those guides and translate it into an INET page. That would greatly help us. But however, if it is not possible that due to some other factors that the project manager was not able to quote-unquote translate the EDI guide that is being given by the implementing application or client or vendor, then we should also be able to read it on our own. And I hope this helps us to further understand how EDIs work and could potentially help us if in any case that we run into one on our own modules. Okay, so I guess that's it. If you don't have any more questions, we can end the session. Do you guys have any question? None?
Hi, sir.
Okay.
With regards to the EDI files per state, so basically we have same formats like in North Carolina and South Carolina, and any other state that uses X12 4030.
There is a format on the end file, on the generated file. What will be different is how the file will be interpreted. Like what I've showed earlier, where North Carolina may require some of the, oh, I haven't shown this, the EDI Notepad. Let's open it up. EDI Notepad, as I've said, is also an application given also from EDI Fabric, which is our third party for our EDI code set. So EDI Notepad, excuse me, reads the EDIs outside of all the other validations. I mean, it only reads what was specified on the X12 version 1030 format. Oh, not version 1030. I mean, this is version independent. So it's using an X12 version. So it will say here that, like for this one, if one is present, the null must be person 03 and person 04. For NC person 03. Must be further here. Where is that? Can I find it here? Yeah, general contact person. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is there will be differences within the validation part. Okay, the format, the ending format will always look like this. Ano? Yeah. Like this, but it will always depend on the state. That's why there is always an EDI coordinator for the State Department, so that they can validate if their specific file is validated with their specific rules. But basically, the generated file format will always be the same for all implementing agencies using the same version. Did I answer your question?
Yes, Sir La. Thank you very much.
Is there any other question? If there's nothing more, then we can stop the recording. Okay, I think. Okay, thank you guys.
Kasi yung di ba, yung model plans natin, excellent yan, wala siyang UI. Naalam na multiple. Pero pag may isang tumakbo may UI, nakakarami mo yung kasi parang sa ngayon, hindi kaya yung sabay na dalawang may UI. Kahit kung sa same network, pag nakita sa network na yung isang machine na yung isa, hindi mo yung pagtatapos na yung nasa ako nila po, ay natin yung sa akin.
Mami na si Mami. Paano i-save yung record? Isa. Alam mo pala i-save yung record. And meeting.